In this section of notes, we're going to look a little bit more at inference. And what we want to look at here is, based on how did we do our study or how did we do our experiment, what kind of conclusions can I make? So there's two basic things here. If you do a random selection and you do that well, then what that's going to do is it's going to allow you to say that the results of your study can be generalized to the whole population. So that's what we mean about inference about the population. So what you saw in these 10 people, do you think that you can expand that and say it's probably true for everyone? If you did a good sampling method, then that would be yes. If you did randomly sample them, then you can generalize your results to the whole population. And the second piece is whether or not you did random assignment in an experiment. So did you take all your people and say, I'm going to flip a coin to decide whether each of these people gets the new drug or the old drug? And if you did that and you got statistically significant results, then you'd be able to make inference about cause and effect. So if you did random assignment, then you can say that we think this treatment causes this reaction. Now the problem is that a lot of times you can't do an experiment, and there's several reasons that you might not be able to do an experiment. The biggest reason is whether or not it's ethical. So for example, do we think that smoking causes lung cancer? Well, we're pretty sure of that, but we can't really take a group of people and say, we're going to take these 50 people and tell them that they have to smoke. And we're going to take these other 50 people and tell them that they're not allowed to smoke. So that would be unethical because I think that there's this negative consequence associated with smoking, and it just wouldn't be a good idea or reasonable for me to do that. So there are some things that we can't do an experiment with because it's not practical or it's not ethical. So sometimes we do have to study something through a study rather than an experiment. And sometimes we can start to approach this idea of causation without quite getting there. So the example with the smoking and the cancer, we're pretty sure about that because we see consistent results. So these are some of the things that you can look at that start to establish causation without actually doing an experiment. So if you see the same results over and over again, and you see these results pretty strongly, and you see that if people smoke more cigarettes per day, they're more likely to get lung cancer. So that's what we mean about the larger values of the explanatory variable are associated with a stronger response. And if you think it's reasonable to believe, so that's what plausible means. Like, does that even make sense to be a possible consequence? So if you see some of these things, it's not quite as being as good and as being able to do an experiment, but we're starting to get those ideas, especially for those things where we can't ethically do an experiment. Now, if you do want to do an experiment, you want to see if it is ethical, and there are three basic things that you need to be able to check off your list, so to speak, in order to say that something is ethical. The first one is that you need to have an institutional review. So that basically just means that you've got a group of people who look over your proposed experiment and they say, yeah, this makes sense, it's safe to do, we're not going to put anyone in danger, and then they approve your experiment. That's institutional review. The second thing you need to have informed consent from the participants. So they need to know that there are consequences and what those consequences are, and they have to agree to be part of the experiment even though they know there are those consequences. And then the last thing is that you need to keep confidentiality. So you can show summary statistics, but you can't show individual people's results of their study. All of those things would help you to come up with an ethical study, and then you'd be able to do an experiment and hopefully be able to show a cause and effect relationship.